welcome you to The Learning Shift in conversation with Elizabeth Carr. If you tuned in last week, you'll remember our conversation with Laura Higley on why creativity isn't a luxury, but a necessity in schools. You know, we had that spotlight on the art curriculum. Today, though, we're turning that spotlight onto PRE, philosophy, religion and ethics, a cornerstone of the educational programme that we have at Avanti Grange. And this is to show how it helps young people think deeply, speak thoughtfully and act with integrity in the real world. So as I said, I'm joined by Elizabeth Carr, long-time friend of the pod, a colleague who has helped shape how PRE lives and breathes across our school. From the big questions we ask to the way we build respectful dialogue in the classroom and beyond. I hope across your dinner tables as well. But I'm certain, Elizabeth, you'll join us in that conversation. So welcome. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Before we dive in, we have a quick rolling question from staff member to staff. Now, a few weeks ago, Laura did put the question, what's one everyday creative habit that helps you think more clearly, that you have in your curriculum? Do you care to answer?
So I thought of an everyday creative habit that I have when I come to designing my curriculum rather than perhaps in delivering it. Maybe that wasn't quite what Laura meant. But my creative habit would be taking a walk outside, getting into nature, getting into the woods, feeling the air, feeling, the world around me. And I think that just helps me to think more clearly and then to bring some of that inspiration.
We were speaking about this yesterday, weren't we? The philosophy walks.
Absolutely.
Is that what you mean?
Yes, I think we spoke about how powerful it can be to walk alongside somebody and have a conversation. But I think actually if you go for a walk on your own, you can also do some real thinking. I often go for a walk and listen to a podcast and then find myself thinking about how I might incorporate that into the curriculum, or I'll be just reflecting on some topics and that I'm maybe struggling to think, how am I going to really make this meaningful for the students in the classroom? And it really helps me, with my planning and thinking about curriculum to just sort of take it for a walk in the fresh air and gets the creative juices flowing.
Well, I'm with you on that one. It's a cornerstone to our English curriculum, embrace nature, get outside and do some thinking. Let's start sharp then, and we're going to dive straight into the PRE curriculum. In one sentence, what is PRE? This is a bit of a challenge, I bet. And why does it matter for every child, not just the religious, spiritually minded or the philosophy minded? Over to you.
I think PRE matters because it is about understanding ourselves and others on a deep level. I think we could say that the whole curriculum is about understanding ourselves and others, but the heart of our PRE curriculum is the concept of a worldview, the idea that nobody stands nowhere, that we each have a perspective and a view of the world, and that's shaped by our culture, by our upbringing, by our experiences, by our education. And understanding our own worldview and those of others is really fundamentally important for all our students if they're going to go out to be spiritually compassionate change makers and make the world a better place. So that's, I think, in a sentence, expanded and explained, that's why PRE matters.
Right, so the big questions then, big questions by each year. So if you could give us a whistle-stop tour of what the big questions are that, say, a year 7 may kind of wade through, and then year 8, year 9, and even into our year 10.
Yes.
That'd be really helpful.
10s and 11s even next year. So we do a lot in our 3 lessons a fortnight of PRE because we tackle 3 really big disciplines that complement one another but are also distinctive ways of knowing and understanding the world. So our students will tackle questions in philosophy, in theology and in social sciences. We tend to begin each year with philosophy and then work our way through some theology and social science questions. So year 7 have begun with what is a love of wisdom, which is what philosophy means in Greek. And then how do we know what we know, which is a branch of philosophy that we call epistemology. So the philosophy of knowledge, and what does it mean to know something? And do we know things because of our experience, or do we know things really through our powers of rational thinking? They'll move on to think more theologically about interpreting different texts and faith stories in the Abrahamic traditions. They'll think about the sociology of why religions are the way they are. Over the course of all 3 years, we'll look at that for a number of different religious traditions. And they'll also think about logic and the origins of the universe, what it means to be human. And then, philosophers have kind of approached the question of whether God exists. So there's a rich mixture for year 7 of philosophy, theology and social science.
I wish I had this when I was at school. It wasn't until I was in my early 20s before. I mean, I always was interested, but it was in my early 20s that I started to gain like that confidence to talk about such things.
I think what we're trying to do really right from year 7 is open up big questions, and for students not to be afraid to ask questions to which there aren't always answers. So at the end of year 7, when we consider logic and the origins of the universe, we think about where science runs out of answers and philosophy takes over because we don't have empirical evidence for what happened before the Big Bang or what the cause of the Big Bang might be. Over the course of year 8, we'll pick up some similar kinds of themes. So they'll finish off thinking, or they're finishing off at the moment, thinking about different philosophical understandings about the existence of God, moving on to the development of Christianity, and then later on in year 8 we have a unit on religion and society where we explore the idea that religion is a conservative force in society or a force for social change, and we look at sort of religion and social justice, which is a theme that we pick up in the GCSE course. Year 9 have a big focus on philosophy again at the beginning of the year, where we think about questions about animals and people's worldviews about animals. We've looked into ethical veganism and the different motivations that people have from all sorts of religious worldviews and non-religious worldviews for also adopting ethical veganism. And now we're asking, are all animals equal? And we're looking at philosophical arguments for equality between humans and other animals, and for inequality between humans and other animals, and looking at how philosophers critique other philosophers' arguments. We'll be moving to ethics in year 9 and thinking about different ethical perspectives or different ethical approaches, including utilitarianism, virtue ethics. And then later in year 9, we're going to introduce a new unit for this year, which will be on the psychology of religion, which is something I'll be working with Miss Flynn, our new PRE specialist teacher, on. And then we'll finish up year 9 after that, thinking about diversity in the Abrahamic and Dharmic traditions, and just sort of building on the existing foundations and just kind of adding a little bit more complexity to it in year 9.
You talk through Key Stage 3, but having taught many children at this school, I'm always fascinated when they bring the epistemology or they bring the ideas from PRE into the English classroom, and quite often it's reflective. So I hear what you're saying there, and I get to experience it within my own curriculum.
And that's something we're trying to do with the Ethos programme in Key Stage 4, because that fulfils our statutory requirement to provide PRE for students all the way through to 18, in fact. But we're trying to make those links to other areas of the curriculum. So at the moment in the Ethos programme, year 10 are tackling the problem of evil, which is something that really comes up a lot in literature. I think a lot of authors explore that idea of what does it mean to be evil, and why is there evil, and how do we deal with it. And later on, when we come towards the end of year 11 and we want them to be focusing on revision, we're going to think about the kind of philosophical and ethical questions that arise in some of their texts for English and for drama and so on, so that we can kind of use our Ethos programme time both to explore really important questions, but also to help them to kind of revise their other subject content in another way. Our GCSE PRE class, which is very large, we had a really excellent uptake. Really pleased that so many of our students wanted to carry on with PRE.
And that is something to put out to parents,
absolutely,
I think, isn't it?
25% of the year group, over 25% of the year
doing
group
doing GCSE
PRE. That's right.
To
continue with that and get a qualification at the end. And they are currently looking about ideas about the nature and existence of God in Christianity, and then they'll be looking at the philosophy of the existence of God, building on their year 8 work. Next, before they move on to think about God in Dharmic traditions with the specialist religions that they focus on in GCSE being Christianity and Hinduism.
Excellent. I mean, how do you do this, though, in the classroom? So let's imagine that in fact, I am a parent. My son comes to the school. So I walk into my son's PRE classroom. What am I expecting to see?
So there's a lot of dialogue. I mean, you see that in any Avanti Grange classroom. So a lot of what you'll see in a PRE classroom is what you'll see in a history classroom, a geography classroom, an English classroom. There are many things that are consistent, but I think something that's very important in PRE, question and answer, it's that dialogic model. We introduce that actually to the students as Socratic dialogue at the beginning of year 7, and we read a bit of a dialogue that Plato records between Socrates, the philosopher and teacher, and others. Particularly we read the dialogue of Socrates and Laches about courage, which is very Avanti appropriate. And Socrates asks questions and Laches has to try and answer them. And so we do follow that kind of Socratic dialogic model. So the students are discussing with their partners and then they're sharing their ideas. And we also use text. So we read faith text, we read primary source text, religious faith stories, for example. Lots of reading aloud, absolutely. Reading aloud, paired rereading, discussion of the text. We do a lot of diagrams as well. There's a real visual and artistic aspect to PRE because When we get to philosophy, particularly, we find it really useful to represent philosophical ideas visually through visual analogies and diagrams. So we've been looking in year 9 at animals, and so we've been doing diagrams and labelling what animal thinking is and what human thinking is according to Aquinas or Kant or Descartes, so that we can compare those and see those ideas represented visually to lift them off the page, because quite often philosophy can be a little bit dense and wordy.
Yeah, well, I could imagine. I've walked in, just parents listening, I've walked into, as you can imagine, walked in many of these PRE lessons, and the times I've walked in and I'm looking at them, the year 9s, you mentioned the animals and having rights, and I've seen images of pigs and, God with lightning bolts coming down to the pig. It is truly a
we talked about in year 9, we came up with the concept of squirrels, criminal squirrels. We felt it had a very nice sound to it. So Kant argues that animals cannot know right from wrong, and therefore if a squirrel steals another squirrel's nuts, that squirrel isn't a criminal squirrel because he doesn't know he's doing wrong. It's just natural for a
so there you go.
Criminal squirrels.
This will be a conversation around the dinner table. What year group is this?
Year 9.
So year 9, when your child reaches year 9, ask them, ask them about criminal squirrels.
Is there such a thing as a criminal squirrel?
Who knows where that conversation would lead you across the dinner table.
Year 9, for me, that idea, it wasn't mine.
Just conscious of time, I'm going to move ahead now to any sensitive topics. You've mentioned the virtues and values in action, but are there any sensitive topics, very briefly, 2 minutes?
Yes, I think there are lots of sensitive topics, because I think all of PRE, a little bit like some of the topics in PSHE, this is where we kind of do link to PSHE a little bit, that we do ask students to engage with ideas that are quite personal to them, and we ask them to really think about depersonalizing it. So we don't ask them to talk about their own beliefs necessarily, but we are very clear to phrase things in the third person, because it's really important that we're respectful of the diversity of different beliefs. And some of that comes through just understanding that although there are organised worldviews like Christianity and Judaism and Hinduism, actually everybody's personal worldviews are a little bit flexible around the edges and don't tend to match up completely. So no two Christians will quite believe the same thing necessarily. And so that's really important, that we're aware of the diversity, and that in itself is sensitive and controversial. When we think about animal rights and we're thinking about sort of vegetarianism and veganism, we've thought about the sensitivities around appearing to criticise something that is normal to somebody else, and respecting the fact that different cultures around the world have very different views and approaches to animals and to food, all the way through to the importance in year 7 of teaching about the history of Judaism and Judaism today, and the concept of diaspora, and the students learn that word diaspora in year 7, and they're very proud to bring it out again in year 9. So when we study the Holocaust in history in year 9, they've got a background understanding of the context and the history of the Jewish community and persecution and so on. So there are all sorts of things that it's very much, if it didn't link to the real world, there wouldn't be really a lot of point in studying it. And the ethics.
That's then why the children love it so much, isn't it? Because they get to have those real world debates that matter to them. So they love talking about the news. And quite often, some of the students know how to get me off topic. They'll ask me a question that I'm interested in. And before you know it, it's like,
that's right.
Where did this lesson go? So very quickly then, one last point for our parent base listening. How can families help with the support or supporting the PRE curriculum at home?
Yeah, so I think it's a really good one for conversations around the dinner table. What are some of the questions? As we ask a lot of questions and we advance a lot of possible answers, but we don't necessarily reach a consensus. So there's many more things that the students can explore. So I've outlined some of the things in the curriculum spotlight piece for Avanti Insight that we're currently studying. Yep. So it might be that over half term, you might want to discuss with your son or daughter some of the things that they've been studying. What is knowledge for year 7? Squirrels. Or can you have a criminal squirrel? That's right. Or does God exist? What are the arguments for and against the existence of God in year 8? Or what is God like according to Christians? If you've got a child doing GCSE, I think also I've put some suggestions on there. There are great podcasts class that can spark conversations, and lots of different places that you might visit. So it might be that you have the opportunity to visit a historic church or something, where if you're travelling over half term, but it might actually just be that you watch a film together and really it prompts a discussion about ethics in some way, about the morality of the characters or the decisions that they make, and what might have influenced their worldview. So you can apply to PRE to your understanding of anything that you're coming across, and any experience that you have, or things that you see on the news or whatever it might be.
Well, I love it. I mean, when my son is around the dinner table and we begin our philosophical conversations, quite often it takes us to weird and wonderful places.
That's the way it should be, I think.
That does bring an end to our spotlight on the PRE curriculum, but we do have our rolling questions. So I'm going to ask you, Elizabeth, Mrs. Carr, sorry, if there's a question that you would like to ask our next guest, what would that question be?
I think it would be a question about what really sets you alive and gets you excited when it comes to planning your curriculum and planning to teach your subject in the classroom. What's the thing that really makes you excited about doing that?
Well, for me, it's the joy of just art and English literature. It's the deep ideas that we attach, but it's the social mobility, the way that writers can change the world. That's for me. But what about yourself?
The power of words. Yeah. I think it is that. Yeah, it's the power of knowledge. But for me, it's always been the fascination of the people that we're studying, the human history, human ideas, humans' interaction with the world in geography is curiosity, isn't it, really?
Well, Elizabeth, thank you as ever for making PRE feel clear, human, genuinely useful in young people's lives. And to everyone listening, PRE isn't just about the beliefs, it's about learning to think well, to listen well, and to live well. This has been The Learning Shift in conversation with Elizabeth Carr. Education is a long journey, but every shift begins with a single conversation, and this was just one of them. Thank you ever so much for listening. Bye.